My family owned a beautiful piece of land, a pristine lake surrounded by untouched forest. For generations, we'd been the sole guardians of this paradise. The heart of it all was a dam my great-grandfather built, giving us control over the lake's water level. This wasn't just property. It was our legacy, our sanctuary. We had an agreement with the local homeowners association, the HOA, that they could develop the land on the far side of the lake, but with strict rules to preserve the natural beauty. They agreed to keep a generous buffer zone of trees and to build only a limited number of homes. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. We thought they understood the value of what we were protecting. We were wrong. A few years ago, I started noticing more activity than usual across the lake. Construction trucks were a constant presence, and the sound of saws echoed from dawn till dusk. I tried to see what was happening, but the dense woods on their side blocked my view. I trusted our agreement, so I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just the initial phase of the limited development we'd agreed to. But then, whispers started floating around town. Rumors of a massive vacation resort, a cash grab aimed at tourists, right on the edge of my family's lake. My stomach dropped. This wasn't what we agreed to. I got in my boat and motored across the lake to see for myself. What I found made my blood run cold. They had clear-cut the entire shoreline, leaving a scar of mud and stumps where a vibrant forest once stood. And there they were, rows upon rows of identical, cheaply built cabins crammed together right up to the water's edge. I counted them, 109. 109 soulless little boxes where there was supposed to be a gentle slope of trees. They had shattered our agreement, violated our trust, and desecrated the land. The HOA president, a smarmy guy named Mr. Harrison, just shrugged when I confronted him. He said the town needed the tourism revenue and that their lawyers had found a loophole in the contract. A loophole, that's what he called this blatant destruction. I was furious, but I knew I couldn't beat them with lawyers. They had more money and more connections. As I stood on my side of the lake, looking at the ugly development, I felt a deep sense of despair. They were going to get away with it. They were going to profit from ruining my family's legacy. I went to the town council meetings. I presented our original agreement. I showed them pictures of the devastation. They listened politely, nodded their heads, and did absolutely nothing. They were already counting the tax dollars from those 109 cabins. I felt utterly defeated. But then, standing by the old dam, I looked at the control wheel, the same one my great-grandfather had turned, and an idea began to form. An audacious, terrifying, and frankly, brilliant idea. The agreement gave me sole control over the dam and the lake's water level. It was a detail they had overlooked in their greedy rush to build. They were so focused on the land they were developing, they forgot about the water it sat next to. The contract was ironclad on that point. The dam was mine. I spent the next few weeks meticulously planning. I checked old floodplain maps and engineering reports for the dam. I calculated exactly how much I could raise the water level without endangering anyone or any property on my side of the lake. The cabins, however, were built on a lolling floodplain, a floodplain they had created by clear-cutting the trees that absorbed excess water. They had built their own trap. The night I decided to act, a storm was rolling in. It was perfect. The heavy rain would provide cover for my actions and would be blamed for the initial rise in the water. Under the cloak of darkness, I went down to the dam. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I grabbed the large cast-iron wheel and began to turn it. It was stiff from years of disuse, but with a surge of adrenaline, I put my entire body into it. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to close the main spillway gate. The roar of the water changed, shifting from a free-flowing cascade to a choked, pressurized surge through the smaller outlets. I wasn't just closing a gate, I was reclaiming my home. I was letting nature do what it does best. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a gray, drizzly dawn. I went out to my porch with a cup of coffee. The lake looked different. It was higher, much higher. Across the water, a scene of chaos was unfolding. The brand new lawns of the vacation cabins were gone, replaced by a muddy, swirling extension of the lake. The water was lapping at the foundations of the first row of cabins. People were running around in a panic, trying to move furniture and belongings to higher ground. The HOA had built their resort on land that was, for all intents and purposes, now part of the lake bed. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. Mr. Harrison called me, screaming into the phone. He accused me of sabotage, of intentionally flooding his precious resort. I calmly reminded him of our agreement. The dam was my responsibility, and due to the recent heavy rains, I had to make adjustments to ensure its structural integrity. It was all perfectly legal, all within the bounds of the contract his own lawyers had supposedly vetted so carefully. I told him I was simply following safety protocols. He threatened to sue me, to ruin me. I told him to go ahead and try. He knew, and I knew, that he didn't have a leg to stand on. The water didn't recede. I kept the gates partially closed, maintaining the new, higher water level. Days turned into weeks. The first row of cabins was perpetually sitting in a foot of water. Mold began to creep up the walls. The foundations started to shift and crack in the saturated soil. The resort, which was supposed to have its grand opening, was now a waterlogged disaster zone. The negative press was immediate and brutal. No tourists wanted to rent a cabin in a swamp. The HIT's investment was turning into a financial black hole. They had poured millions into a project that was literally sinking. In the end, the HOA was forced to declare bankruptcy. The project was a total loss. The bank foreclosed on the property, and with no bias, the land was eventually donated to a state conservation trust. The cabins were deemed unsafe and were torn down. It took a few years, but slowly, the land began to heal. Grasses and shrubs started to grow back where the cabins once stood. The shoreline, once a muddy scar, began to look natural again. The lake was bigger, wilder, and more beautiful than ever. Sometimes, when the water is clear, you can still see some of the old concrete foundations, a ghostly reminder of the HOA's greed. I didn't break any laws. I just read the contract and let nature handle the rest. My family's legacy is safe, and the lake is finally at peace. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.